everyone, Clio here, and today I'm going to be going through The Ruin of Kings with you guys. Now, The Ruin of Kings is the first book in what is to be a 5-part fantasy series called A Chorus of Dragons, written by Jenn Lyons. Now, complexity is the name of the game when it comes to this book. This book is very complex in its structure, and it's also very complex in its world, in the information that we are given. And so confusion is kind of what reigns supreme during the reading of this book. Which is also at the same time the main criticism I see leveled against it. So I kind of, when going over some reviews for this book, have mainly seen it split into two: people who absolutely love the complexity of this book and the way in which that is delivered, versus people who feel like it is overly complex and that it should have reduced its complexity a little bit in order for the story to shine through better. For me personally, I fall to the first category, the ones who absolutely loved the complexity of this story. I, for one, really love complex structures to begin with, and it's something that I don't necessarily stumble upon very often when it comes to fantasy literature. It's something that I very much enjoy in general fiction, so perhaps that is also part of the reason why a lot of fantasy readers dislike this, the complexity of this book, because it is something that you don't stumble across that often when it comes to fantasy literature. But so complexity, as I said, is the name of the game, and that starts with its structure. So The Ruin of Kings is kind of presented to us as a report that is being written by Dolores in order to inform his ruler of what has taken down, of the events that will be told throughout this book. And so his rendition of what has taken place is kind of split into two parts. So the first part is going to be a rendition of a conversation between Kieran, our protagonist, and his jailer Talon. His jailer Talon actually is a mimic, which means that she has the power to impersonate the people who she has killed and eaten. So as a result, we get a very interesting narrative structure at the very beginning of this book, because the first, let's say, 3/4 of this story is us getting intermittent chapters from Kieran's perspective, in which he is telling the story of how he landed up in prison to begin with, and his story starts from the point in which he was sold to the Black Brotherhood. However, Talon feels like his story started way earlier than that, and so she will be kind of bridging the gap. She will be telling the story from when he was a 15-year-old boy and when he stumbled across a crime scene up until the point where Kieran started his story. And then the final part of this story is told from a sort of like present day time period, in which we're looking at the way in which the story unfolds from the moment in which Kieran is imprisoned until the point of time in which Dolores is writing his report. So complex structure, but I absolutely eat that up. The moment that I read that Talon was a mimic and that she was going to tell that story through her experience of the people she had previously eaten who were close to Kieran, I was like, yeah, so interesting, give it to me, I want it. It also had so many implications for the story. These implications can go wrong as well, of course, because it means that from the get-go, or at least throughout the book, when you have a Talon chapter and she's telling the story from a perspective of a certain character, you know that that character is going to end up dead. So that definitely is an interesting piece of information to give us up front. However, I also kept on forgetting about that throughout the book. So at times when characters would be dying, I was like, oh yeah, I should have known that they were gonna die, because Talon told the story from their perspective. So it's interesting how you can forget that whole thing, but I think that that was such an interesting narrative structure that she introduced into this book by having Talon be able to be one of the viewpoints for this story. Apart from that, I just really love that whole back and forth between Kieran's perspective and Talon's perspective, between that more present-day timeline and that older timeline. I know that a lot of people have given the commentary that they would have liked it more if it was told in a traditional chronological way, but I completely disagree. I think I would have been bored if it was told in a traditional way, because I think this way we had a nice mix all the time between sometimes a little bit more slow-paced chapters in one time period and then more fast-paced, plot-oriented ones in the other time period. So we could constantly move move back and forth, and we had these and for me that meant that I really kind of flew through this book the entire time. It also made me constantly crave the other timeline to some extent, and so I would always want to continue on at the end of each chapter. So it was kind of difficult for me to put down this book actually as a result, because I always wanted to read, like I was always excited for both of these viewpoints, and because I'd always had to wait another chapter, I always wanted to continue on further. One thing that I forgot to mention about this whole sort of rendition of the story being told by Kieran and Talon is that while we're getting the story from Kieran and Talon, we're also getting commentary from both of these from time to time about the other person's storytelling, but we're also getting commentary from Turtleshaw Dolores, who's writing his report, who will be commenting on the accuracy of certain things taking place within the storyline, or will be giving some more background information on some of the information. So you also have footnotes to go along with this very complex structure, and the footnotes are definitely there for a reason. I would definitely say don't skip over them, but they also add a nice level to it, because it's kind of commentary that sometimes very much is sort of like sassy or sarcastic commentary, sometimes even to what is written within the text proper, but they will also be, the commentary will also be like contradicting what is written down as, what is sold as factual information within the main storyline. So I would definitely say don't skip over the footnotes. There aren't that many. I mean, it's not like every single page has a footnote to them, so definitely read them. They're definitely entertaining as well. And so, as I said, a lot of people feel like a traditional ordering of chapters would have helped with the complexity of the world, and I think it might have helped to some extent with the complexity of this world. However, I think the main reason for this complexity is that it is intentional. You are supposed to feel confused, you're supposed to feel like you don't have all of the answers, you don't have all of the information, you don't have every single detail that you need in order to fully understand this world, which is very much a conscious decision, I think. And the fact that we are not given all details or not given a whole lot of exposition has everything to do with the fact that this is a report to a ruler. There's no need for this report to include a lot of details about the world, about its inhabitants, because the ruler of this world or the ruler of this empire will obviously know all that information, so that's the reason why we're not given that information. So how do we get that information? We need to get that information through a more natural process and through a character that isn't necessarily always as informed. So Kieran, our protagonist of this story, which, I mean, we're more than 10 minutes into this and I'm finally going to talk to you guys about what the story is about, I guess. But so Kieran turns out to be a very complex character, because he is introduced to us as a 15-year-old boy who has a sort of criminal background because he has a street named Rook. He's basically somebody who is going around stealing for a living. But very early on we find out that there's a lot more to him, and that he actually has a royal lineage, that he actually has a bloodline that comes from one of the royal houses of this world. And throughout we will be uncovering a lot more complexity to his lineage, as well as some information on a prophecy that is apparently also being linked to him. But so Kieran has not really been very interested in royal houses and all of those things, and in any case he's always been a sort of outsider character. So when he kind of finds out about his lineage, he also is introduced to a lot more information about royal houses and the way in which their power dynamics work, for example. And later on in his Black Brotherhood timeline, we're also being introduced to some elements that he hasn't been informed of, or that he wasn't aware of up until that point. So he's very much our entry point into some of the information within this world. However, people also feel like he shouldn't have all of the information yet. They also feel like he isn't ready for everything. So we are offered information in these sort of like tiny sprinklets, these tiny indications here and there. And I am very much confident that at some point these will all mesh up together and form a coherent whole. However, it's very much more sort of like puzzle that we need to work out ourselves, rather than a world that is going to be fleshed out to us, that is going to be spelled out to us. And that is actually an element that I find I very much like in fantasies. It kind of makes me think of the Broken Earth trilogy, for example, where we're also definitely kind of thrown into a world and kind of have to figure out things for ourselves through hints and flashes here and there. It also makes me think of The Seventh Perfection by Daniel Polanski, which was also a book that didn't really dive into a lot of the world building because it didn't really make sense to have world building explanation in a book that is structured as a dialogue only book, where there's much less opportunity for exposition about the world itself. So I very much enjoyed that complexity of this world. I think it works very well within this structure. I think it is needed for this structure, and whereas I do definitely feel lost, I actually quite liked it because I feel it is intentional. And so I will definitely say that if you are reading this book and after like 100 pages or something you are just exasperated with feeling like you don't know what is happening, like if at that point you just kind of want to tell yourself like just stick through with it, it'll all be clear by the end, do know that at the end of this first book at the very least you will still be left wondering what I don't really know what is happening, I don't really know what's the deal is with the gods, for example. I don't know how this or that works. I don't know enough about the affair of the forces. I don't know enough about Kieran as a protagonist or his lineage. Then I would definitely say that if that feeling of confusion, if you really dislike it or you really don't, or you don't really like it after like 100 pages, that feeling is going to remain with you, I suspect, until very late, maybe even until the very end of the series. So do know that I felt confused from the beginning, but I also liked that feeling, and that is why I like this book in the end as well. Other things that I definitely enjoyed about this book is definitely that it addresses some things that I haven't often seen addressed in fantasy to this extent. So for example, there is an occurrence of rape within this story. It is not rape in our understanding of rape, it is more sort of like mental rape. It is more a sort of mental violation of somebody's mind, in which somebody's mind is broken into by somebody else, but the discussion that is had later on about the impact that that has had on that person, about the way in which that person needs to deal with what has happened to him, definitely feels like it could be a discussion on rape itself. And it's very interesting that it happens to a male character in that sense as well, because this type of conversation I've mainly seen being handled by female characters in stories so far. So that, for one, I already thought was a very interesting element. Another interesting scene is one in which he's kind of enticed into physical interaction with a woman, with an older woman, because of imbibing too much alcohol, and the whole discussion of that scene afterwards with his newfound aunts was very interesting, and also once again an interesting one to see from the perspective of a boy or a man being the one who is taken advantage of, rather than a female character, the way that we often see those types of situations portrayed, not just in books but in media in general. And so I think it was interesting to look at it. In any case, even if it would have been a female character, it would have been very refreshing to see the story, to see the way in which it was handled by the aunt afterwards. And there are quite some instances within the books in which things are introduced that definitely have value to our modern day experience, and definitely are relating to some ways in which certain people are shamed, or which certain behaviors are put in a wrong light. And that I definitely appreciate a whole lot. Definitely felt like it was a breath of fresh air. The way it talks about heteronormativity as well, for example. So we definitely do have characters that are queer, we do have characters that are openly queer, but there are definitely also some characters that we are seeing kind of discover their sexuality, I guess, who kind of are figuring out what exactly their sexuality is. I definitely know in which direction I want to see it lean, because I want a certain ship to sail. In terms of if you're interested in like whether it's character driven or whether it's plot driven, those things, I actually don't really know. For me personally, it feels plot driven, but I've heard so many people who didn't like this book say that nothing happens within it, so that I'm like, okay, maybe it's not plot driven, even though I feel it's plot driven, because I feel it's definitely not character driven, because I don't feel like there's huge character development. The character development isn't really there. Like the Kieran that we meet at the beginning of this story is the Kieran that we have at the end of this story. He just has some more information, but I definitely don't feel like his character or his attitude to life or whatever has changed anything. And that's also a problem that I have, because we do like years pass by there, and at some points we even do these sort of time jumps where the author will just put a sentence in there like 2 years passed or something like that, and it doesn't feel like 2 years passed. First of all, because we haven't spent those 2 years with our character, we haven't seen what has taken place in those 2 years, but our character himself has also not changed within that time. So that's kind of something that I'm missing as a character-driven reader myself. However, I did very much enjoy this one, whereas purely plot-driven books I usually don't enjoy. So it's apparently not plot-driven, it's not character-driven, so it's gonna have to be world-driven, I guess, then. So I don't know, guys. I don't know whether it's plot-driven or character-driven. I think you need to kind of dive into yourself in that case, because I cannot give you the answer here. For me, it felt more plot-driven than character-driven, but for plot-driven people, it doesn't feel like a lot of things happen. That's all I can say about that. But so yeah, I think I really cannot go into much with this book, I guess, because of the fact that, first of all, I don't understand enough of it to really be able to go into things, and a lot of that will not be interesting for somebody who is going to be diving into it. I will say that it is going to be somewhat difficult to keep track of characters, because there is this element that is introduced of the possibility to swap souls with somebody. Now, it's not a possibility for like every single person out there, you know. It has very strict rules to it, but it has happened quite a lot in the past of this world. So at certain points in time, the lineage of Kieran and other characters within this world becomes so confused, because you have these cases of like, yeah, that person, but that person was actually inhabited by the soul of that person, and those types of things. So that becomes very difficult, very complex to follow. And so in that sense, I would also say read the physical book. So I actually listened to the audiobook towards the end mainly. In the beginning, I listened to the audio with the physical book with me, because I needed it. I needed it to be able to keep track of all of these things, to be able to keep track of the world. In general, I just feel like I need it when it comes to fantasy, because I need to see the written form of a lot of these terminologies or these names that are being introduced in order for me to fully grasp it. Probably because I'm not a visual reader, because I don't make images in my mind, and so I need the sort of like written form of the word in order to be able to remember it better, or be able to associate it better when we stumble upon it again later in time. And so that is going to be a little bit more difficult, keeping track of characters and things like that. And so I would kind of encourage you there to possibly just take your time with that a little bit more than I did. Because I was listening along to the audiobook, I sometimes didn't necessarily take the time to really think through the whole like combination of that person but that person's soul, and so I think that would probably be worthwhile for you guys to check it out. Also, apparently the physical book has a sort of family tree at the back, so do go and check that out for reference whenever you need it. It also has a glossary that might be interesting as well, in case you're kind of lost when it comes to this world. But I think overall you're really just supposed to live the ride. You just have to go on the ride, be confused, and then from time to time certain things fall into place, other things become more unclear, and I'm just expecting for there to be some clarity to it in the end. I know that people who dislike this book feel like there's a lot of sort of like twisting, a lot of plot twists involved when it comes to sort of the revelations that we do get. I personally never really considered them to be plot twists, I guess because I always didn't fully understand them enough. I didn't fully understand the whole implication of that thing yet, so I always just thought it was kind of sort of like, huh, here's a hint, and like we still need to uncover why that is such a big revelation, you know. We still need to uncover the full implication of what they've just dropped yeah, I think that this was a totally incoherent book talk, and we'll have to see how editing me manages to do in turning this into some semblance of normality. But I don't think I can go into much more with this book, considering it is a spoiler-free review, which I didn't even mention at the beginning, but it'll be in the title, I guess. But so yeah, hope you still enjoyed this totally incoherent book talk, and yeah, I'll be interesting to know if you guys are eager to pick it up or not after this one. I think it's difficult to sell because I know that there's such diverse reactions to this book, and because I can easily see it being that way, you know. As I said, I really love this book a whole lot. Really, like, I haven't been as excited about a book as I was like halfway through this book. I think towards the end I was more getting to the stage of like, should I still be feeling confused, or is this just my brain not keeping up with what has been revealed? But I feel like I should still be confused. I feel like that is a correct feeling at this point in time. But so definitely if the series manages to wrap up at some point, or to kind of combine those things and give me satisfactory information at some point in time, it's gonna be a new all-time favorite because I've been thoroughly enjoying it. But as I said, I can easily see that for somebody else this might not be as neat or as tidy or as satisfactory of a read. If you're somebody who needs more like clean answers, who needs like to understand, fully understand the world in order to be able to grasp something, then that might be more of a problem. If you have huge problems with loose magic systems, for example, I don't necessarily think it's a loose magic system here, but we don't know much about the magic system, so in that sense that could also be a problem for you as a reader. So that makes it difficult for me to talk about this book, because I know that a very different reaction to this book is possible. But so in any case, I loved it. I'm continuing on. In February we will be getting my thoughts on the sequel, The Name of All Things, and so I'm hoping to love it as much as I did the first one. If you have already read it, definitely let me know down below what your thoughts were on it. Are you one of the persons who loved it, or did you have huge problems with it? Definitely feel free to comment on that as well down below. But so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and see you guys for a future one. Bye!